Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video we are going to be going over leasing. It's something that I haven't talked about in quite some time, and I think that I need to talk about it because we have a crazy market, and some people are talking about leasing being the thing to do right now, and so yeah. Let's get into whether or not you should lease in this current market. So before we talk about whether or not you should lease in the current market, let's talk about what leasing is quickly, and then we'll talk about what's happening in the current market and then whether or not you should lease right now. So first off, if you aren't familiar with leasing, leasing is basically like an extended car rental in a sense. Basically what you're doing is you are making monthly payments to be able to drive around a car, and at the end of the term, you have several different options, right? You can either turn in the car, right? And that's kind of why it's like a rental in a sense. Or you can choose to basically buy out the rest of the balance on the car that's owed, and then you basically own the car. Or you can actually sell the car at the end of the lease. That's something that a lot of people don't know, is you can actually sell the car at the end of the lease. And so you guys are probably wondering, well, then how would they determine how much you're going to pay for the car and the buyout and all that kind of stuff? Basically, what they do is they predict what they think the car is going to be worth in, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 years, depending on how long your lease is, right? There's leases that are very long nowadays. It's pretty crazy. It used to be, people would only lease for 2 years or 3 years. Now people are leasing for literally 6 or 7 years, which is, just crazy to me. But anyways, they basically guess what the car value is going to be at that point. And so then that's what's called the residual value. So that's what you're going to have to, as the person that's borrowing the car, essentially, you're going to have to pay the car down to. And that's how the lease works. But there's some other things that go into it, like money factor, which is basically the interest rate for the lease. And this is why leasing in the past was so attractive, because when you convert the money factor into an actual interest rate, it was typically lower than what a regular interest rate was on a car, or sometimes it was even zero, which is pretty crazy. But sometimes that was the case. There's other ways that leasing companies make money other than just, on the leasing interest. So basically your payment is determined by, how much you pay for the car, how much the car is worth at the end of the term, and then what the leasing rate is. And there's some other things that go into there, but those are the main components. And, for the vast majority of time, right, this would give people a lower monthly payment on a lease versus on a purchase, because instead of them making payments on the entire balance of the vehicle, they're only making payments on part of the balance of the vehicle. And then the other attractive thing, right, is the fact that you have options at the end of the lease. You can turn it in, you can sell it, or you can buy it. Whereas if you go and buy a car, you have one option: pay it off or sell it before it's paid off, right? Those are the only two options. So leasing gives you a little bit more flexibility. Obviously, the market's changed quite a bit, right? After COVID, used car values have skyrocketed. New cars are very hard to get a hold of, and new car values have also gone up, right? The amount of money that people are having to pay for them has gone up by like $10,000 in the last couple of years. And so that has obviously affected leasing quite a bit. So what has changed is not what you'd think. So first off, obviously with new cars being sold for higher amounts, that means the initial purchase price of the lease is higher than what it used to be. There aren't a bunch of incentives like there was in the past with leasing. In the past, sometimes you would get some extra discounts if you leased, whereas now that's not happening. Leasing companies aren't getting discounts really, and car manufacturers aren't really giving discounts, and dealerships aren't really giving discounts, right? So that does affect the lease, right? So already at the start of the lease, right, it's more expensive than it was in the past because you're having to pay more for the new car that you're trying to lease. Now, that might have been mitigated if residual values had increased. And, that was the thought, right? Used car values have gone up an astronomical amount. So then you'd go, oh, well, if used car values are so high, then that means the residual value, which is based off of what they think that car is going to be selling for used, should be higher. That's not the case. Leasing companies have been extremely conservative with residual values, and they haven't really raised them. And so what that means is you are paying more for a car right now when you go out to lease it because the purchase price is higher. And then on top of that, the residual value hasn't gone up with the used car market. And so your payments actually are much higher in a lease right now than they were in the past. And then on top of that, that money factor that we were talking about, the interest rate on a lease, has also increased. And some leasing companies are leasing cars at an equivalent rate of about 4%, right? Which is pretty high because, if you have really good credit right now, you can get an auto loan rate with some places as low as 1.9 to 2.5%, basically somewhere in that range, which is just crazy low for an auto loan rate. But yeah, those factors have actually increased the amount of cost that goes into leases. And so a lot of people have been going into dealerships and finding that they would actually have a higher payment on a lease than they would have on a traditional finance purchase, basically, because of those factors, right? The residual value is not going up, purchase price being higher, and then the leasing interest rate also being higher as well. And if you guys are wondering, why leasing companies are doing this, right? They're doing this to kind of protect themselves. A lot of people think that the used car values are not going to stay this high forever. They think that this is quote unquote transitory, right? The used car values are high now, but then they're going to go back down. And so leasing companies don't want to give people really high residuals, and then the used car values drop a ton, and then the leasing companies then have to purchase these vehicles for that residual value, which they think is going to be way over market value in the near future. So here's what I have to say is, first off, if you're looking to lease a car right now, I would recommend looking at everything associated with the lease, right? The money factor, the residual value, and then also obviously the purchase price, and then compare that to traditional financing or, paying cash, depending on, what your finances look like. And what you're probably going to find is that just buying the car is going to be the best route to go, and that's why less and less people are leasing. And don't look at just what the monthly payment is. Look at the total amount that you'd pay for the car. This is what I always did when I compared a lease to a purchase. So what I would look at is, let's say that I'm going to be buying a $50,000 car. I would look at, $50,000 car, and I'd look at how much my interest rate would be if I did traditional financing, and then I would look at how much interest I would pay over the course of that entire loan if I made every single payment and didn't make any extra payments. And let's just say that because of my rate, right, you pay an extra $5,000 in interest, just for example sake, right, over the term of this loan. So then I go, okay, I'm going to be paying about $55,000 for this car because the purchase price is $50,000, and then I pay $5,000 in interest. Then I would look at the lease, and what I would basically do is, again, you're looking at the actual purchase price of the car initially, and then also the residual value, right? And then also look at the payments you're going to be making in the lease and what those add up to, because that's ultimately what you'll be paying for the vehicle. So then I would add up all the payments, and I'd add up the residual value, and then you'd see how much you're actually going to be paying for the car if I bought it out at the end of the term. And that's very important, because then you're going to see how much you are or aren't paying for this vehicle. And if that amount was higher than the traditional finance amount, even if the traditional financing payment was higher, I would go with traditional financing, because with the leasing, right, I would end up spending quite a bit more money, right? And so just, again, pretty simple, just add up. And a lot of leasing companies now will ask for like a down payment. So take into account your down payment, your monthly payment, and then the residual value, add all of that up. And if that is more than what you pay with traditional financing, don't do the lease, go for traditional financing. Even if the payment's higher, right? And if it's something you can't afford, then, just be humble and say, I can't afford this vehicle right now. I'll wait until I can in the future, basically. The next group of people, if you are already leasing a vehicle, what should you do with your lease? And the quick answer is look at your residual value and look at the market value on your car. And chances are, if you leased a vehicle pre-COVID, or even during certain parts of COVID, you're probably up in value, right? So just doesn't matter when you lease your car, just check. And this is what you should do regardless, right? Whenever you're getting close to turning your lease, you should see what the residual value is, ultimately what you would owe on the car, and then what those cars are selling for. And if you have positive equity, right, then make sure that you recapture that money. The leasing company doesn't want you to do that. And so you might have to work with the dealership to make it so that this is all possible. The reason the leasing company doesn't want you to do that is they're hoping that you'll just turn in the car and then they can go flip it for a quick profit, especially in this market right now. That's kind of where the leasing companies are trying to make money, since people aren't leasing as many cars. So again, look at the residual value, look at the market value, and if you have positive equity, make sure that you do not turn in that car, right? Make sure that you go and sell that car so you can get that money, and then you can put it towards your next car or whatever you want. Or what you could also do, right, is go, okay, well, the market's crazy right now, and even if I go and, sell this car and get some equity out of it, I'm still gonna have to pay more for, the newer version of this car, whatever you want to go purchase. And so you might go and take it as, okay, I'm buying this car under market value, even though you have paid it down to that value, right? So you've already made the payments on it. You can say, I'm just going to buy this car because I can't buy anything equivalent for that amount of money. And that's another route to go if you're already leasing a car, is do the buyout route to where you go and buy it out and, own it. And there's several different things you can do at the end of the lease. You can either just pay cash for the remaining balance, or you can even finance it. Obviously, if you finance it, then you need to obviously look at how much interest you'd be paying on that, right? And add that up with the lease payment so you know the total cost of ownership of that vehicle. So like, again, if we go back to our example, let's say that I am leasing a $50,000 vehicle, residual is $20,000, right? So I get it down to $20,000. And so then I add up how much those lease payments were, right? And so you'd probably pay a little bit of interest on that. And then I go, okay, I'm going to finance the remaining balance, which is $20,000. Then you need to add up, you know, what the interest is going to be on that and see how much your total cost would be into the vehicle. And it might surprise you, right? It can get pretty costly. I remember working at the dealership, you know, sometimes when I would add it up, what it would, for people, it would be like, okay, if they leased a, and this is just example's sake, leased a $50,000 vehicle, and then they pay, you know, they end up paying between fees and, you know, money factor and all that kind of stuff. They end up paying like, you know, $5,000-$6,000 over the course of the lease, and then they go and finance it afterwards, and then they'd pay another like $5,000 to $6,000, and so that $50,000 vehicle is actually a $60,000+ vehicle after all finance charges were paid and everything. So yeah, just read into all of it. I don't want this video to be too much longer, but I want you guys to let me know if this helped you, if you guys want me to make more videos about leasing and all that kind of stuff. And with all that being said, I will see all of you in that next video.